is food science, so welcome everyone, specifically on food spoilage. So hello everyone, I'm Melanie. I'm in my third year of the Dietetics program. I'm a huge major foodie. That feels a little cringy to say, but I'm also a food science lover. My role in the LFS Student Services team is that I'm an LFS ambassador. And so part of my role is that we get to meet students like you and share our passions about LFS and how we got here. So a land acknowledgement. UBC's Vancouver campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. The faculty of LFS is committed to working with Indigenous communities and students alike in our curriculum and research. So I always like to take a minute to share what these words really mean to me. I heard this numerous times when I came to UBC, but didn't truly understand or feel connected to this land acknowledgement until I learned what the definitions meant when I came into this role. So traditional means that the land was traditionally occupied and used by Indigenous people for mainly sacred purposes. Ancestral means that this land was passed down from generation to generation, and unceded means that the land was taken from them without their permission and no treaty. And I'd also like to note that I'm not coming in from the UBC campus today. I'm joining today from Burnaby, and you can also find out the connections you have to your land using the website on the right, nativeland.ca, but this is only for Canadian it's specific to Canada, but a quick Google search can also help you discover the same information wherever you are in the world. So I'm coming from Burnaby, and that's the land of the Salish people, Hunkaminam, and also Squamish, and I believe Tsleil-Waututh. Yeah, I think it's really important to just think about the connections you have to the land, because this is where I play, where I study, and yeah, it's had connections and people have lived here for so many years, and it's really great to honor that. So moving on to our community agreement. So in this one, we will respect all opinions. I like to encourage everyone, there's no right or wrong answers. All guesses, all participation is welcome. 2, we will be open-minded to new ideas. And 3, we will be present and participate actively during this workshop. So I'd really like to emphasize being present and participating actively. I know it's 8 a.m. or the morning for many of us, not all of us, but yeah, it's so great that everyone's here, and I want to emphasize again that it's okay not to have the right answer. So trust your gut. Maybe a guess will result in the right answer. I encourage everyone to step a bit out of their comfort zone today so we can have a really good discussion. So what is food science? Food science is defined as the study of chemical, physical, and biochemical properties of food. And applying all this type of information is used to process, preserve, and store foods. And this is food technology, which you will be also learning in food science. And so creating that product, my teacher described it as all the way from when you pick that fruit off the vine, all the way to the grocery store, how it ends up there. That entire process is dealt by food scientists. So how we preserve our foods, creating new different food products that are better quality, longer shelf life, and meet consumer needs. And so this is all cool food science facts. And so today we'll be diving into microorganisms. So what are they and what types are found in food? Microorganisms is quite a mouthful for me, and I'll be abbreviating it as MOs throughout this presentation. So sometimes that's how we abbreviate it in the science community as well. So what are microorganisms, or MOs? So the definition is that it's an organism that is microscopic. So tiny, tiny organisms you can only see through the microscope. And my question to you is, can you think of any microorganisms found in food? You can put that in the chat, annotate if you like. I know chat's a really popular function. I'll give a couple minutes for if you can think of anything. So if any of you guys are bakers or like baking or cooking as a hobby, you might know one. I'll give a hint. Bread. So what do you use in making bread? Ooh, okay, mold. Okay, you don't use mold in making bread, but yes, mold. Yeast, yes. Mold is a great one. That's a good example. Yeast, yep. So you got 2 yeast, mold. That is all great answers. Bacteria, okay. Okay, I'll explain them on the next slide, but there's actually 5, and we've already covered 3 out of the 5, which is pretty impressive. Awesome. Cool. All right. I'll share them on the next slide now. We got 3 out of the 5. I'm very impressed. So the 5 main organisms found in food are parasites. Many people do not, I did not know this until I took this course. Viruses, bacteria, yeasts, and molds. And today we'll mainly be focusing on molds, but we'll also talk a little bit about yeast and bacteria towards the end and how they contribute to making common food products you see. And so these microorganisms can be categorized in 3 different ways: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So good microorganisms are MOs used in food processing. So if any of you guys, like I said, are bakers and you know that yeast is a key ingredient in bread making, so this would be an example of a good MO. Bad MOs are MOs that can cause food spoilage. So if you ever notice your vegetables or fruits becoming super soggy or mushy, or your food product has this really off odor, they're not necessarily like, they're bad, but they're not necessarily dangerous. They just give off unpleasant physical properties. And so ugly microorganisms are MOs that can make us seriously ill, or they can cause infections. So ugly MOs would be if you've ever heard of an E. coli outbreak or salmonella, eating uncooked food products, they can make you very, very sick. And typically symptoms would be like stomach pain, diarrhea, vomiting. And you see this a lot in the news as well, or maybe in movies. If anyone has ever heard of a food recall, those are from ugly microorganisms, and or a food outbreak are all caused from ugly microorganisms. So I'm gonna ask everyone to use their Zoom text annotations to fill in the table. You can write down anything you know about good, bad, or ugly microorganisms. It doesn't have to be just listing MOs. Feel free to write down anything you know. For example, good would be bread or like yeast. Bad could be like stinky, like soggy. I know ugly could be like symptoms you know when you get food poisoning. You could write down food poisoning. Yeah, if you feel more comfortable using the chat instead of the anno. Oh my gosh, lactobacillus, yes. Oh my God, we're getting really good answers. If you feel comfortable using the chat, you can type your answers there as well. Just put the listeria. Listeria, I think depending on the type, could be an ugly microorganism as well, because it can make you sick. Whereas bad microorganisms might not necessarily make one sick. It's just bad as in physical properties you don't want in a food. They're more like, but it's still a great answer for ugly. So lactobacillus, I believe, is in for making yogurts. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Awesome. I'll just give this a couple minutes. If not, I don't actually have any answers for this slide. It's listeria. There we go. It's just a general brainstorm to see what people know about food microorganisms. Or any products they can make. Yeast, yeah, there we go. That's a great one. E. coli, awesome. Cool. Wine, oh my gosh, that's also a good one, yes. fermenting sugars. I talk a little bit about wine towards the end of my presentation, so hold on. Awesome, thank you so much for your participation. That was great. Okay, I'll be moving on. Thank you for clearing the slides, Christine. So now we're gonna be talking about microbial food spoilage. So these are the bad microorganisms, specifically mold, that can cause spoilage. So mold spoilage. Unlike other forms of microorganisms, mold is the one you can physically see and detect. You begin to notice a fuzzy bluish gray not substance, like I guess fuzz, which is a sign of visible growth. Your food will begin to soften due to the enzymes breaking down the proteins and also the sugars. Molds most commonly spoil foods with low water activity, and that's what low AW means. And AW is a really important property of food we need to know because typically higher water activity means a smaller shelf life. Food spoils quicker. And so microorganisms typically use the water in foods for their chemical reactions. And that's why for preserving foods, we can extend the shelf life by lowering the water activity. I always like to give the examples of strawberries. For an entire container of, I'm not sure if everyone does this, but I eat my strawberries so slowly that one or two will always go moldy. And that usually happens, honestly, pretty quickly, like within a week maybe, or 2 weeks in my fridge. And when you think about a dried strawberry, that can last, I think about freeze-dried strawberries. So maybe if you ever get cereal with like little strawberry chunks, or maybe like picking up granola and they have dried strawberry, like dried fruits in general, you don't even need to put them in the fridge, and they have a really long extended shelf life. You can probably eat your cereal honestly like 6 months and they probably won't go bad. And this is because they have a lower water activity. So by removing all the water, the microorganisms can no longer use them for their chemical reactions. And that's why the food is extended for a long period of time, because the sugars and proteins are staying intact and not being broken down. And so you don't get that really big mushiness or like you see mold growing. But mold in this case is really special. It actually doesn't need a high water activity to grow. It actually prefers lower water activity, which is why it spoils cheeses, fermented meats, which are dried, and also baked goods, such as bread. But it can also spoil fruits and vegetables that are fresh. Yes. And so mold is like a double agent. It can do like low AW or high AW. It's a very flexible microorganism, I like to say. So molds on fruits and vegetables. So fruits and vegetables typically have a longer shelf life than certain types of grain products. And this is because they have a protective skin around them that protects the food from mold spoilage and other microorganisms. I'd like to add that there are different types of mold. So the molds that we use to make blue cheese, and also the molds you find on fruits and vegetables, as well as the molds you find on bread, they're completely different genres or species of mold. And so some molds can be quite dangerous, particularly the ones you see on fruits, which is the genus Penicillium, isn't toxic or isn't dangerous. And so plants also have microbial defense mechanisms that mold are able to overcome. So while the plants have these enzymes that are usually fighting off other bacteria, which is why you don't really see E. coli outbreaks on apples, they are susceptible to mold. So I have a question for you that you can put in the chat. Is it safe to eat moldy bread if I cut off the molded part? Yes or no? Maybe. You can also choose to annotate if you'd like. Okay, so we have one no. I did this workshop yesterday and the floor was completely divided. We got a 50-50 split vote between no or okay. Yeah, most people 100% no. That's so interesting. Oh my gosh. Okay, so far everyone's a no. Okay. Cool, 100%. Well, you guys are all food scientists. The answer is no. So according to the USDA, molds can grow deep roots, and eating soft moldy foods, even if you cut off the moldy part, could be dangerous to your health. And so molds, they really remind me of a tree or a plant where they grow roots that are almost branch-like. They spread out like that, and they travel deeper and deeper into the food. And this part of the roots is not visible to the naked eye. Um, what makes molds really dangerous is that they could also release a toxin called mycotoxins. These are normally found on drier products such as cereal, spices, and grain products. So I'm not promoting people to eat spoiled vegetables, but typically the molds found on vegetables, like I said earlier, penicillin is not toxin producing. So it might have an unpleasant smell and be very mushy, but technically no one's going to go to the hospital from eating moldy fruits. But if you eat moldy grain products such as bread or rice, this could be really dangerous because it could have toxins such as mycotoxins within the food. And so, no, you should not be eating your moldy bread. I, however, before I took this class, have definitely done the thing where I've cut the bread and yeah, but yes, don't do it. And so now we'll be moving on to spoilage used in the food industry. And this is how food spoilage can be used beneficially to make food products. And so mold is one of those microorganisms that can be categorized as a good microorganism and a bad microorganisms. And same with many of the other microorganisms we mentioned. They can be categorized into multiple ones, just depending on how we use them and how they exist on foods. Yes. And so making cheese, this is a really fun one. So cultures for making cheese are from lactic acid bacteria, which is simplified as lab. They convert milk sugars, lactose to lactic acid. I know many of you have probably heard of lactose because the human body, not everyone's body is equipped to digest these milk sugars. So if you're lactose intolerant, you might have heard of this before. I know I am because I cannot tolerate milk. I drink soy milk as an alternative. And labs convert lactose to lactic acid. Yes. And there are a wide range of bacterial cultures that create distinctive flavors in cheese. So if you wonder where that sharpness from Parmesan or cheddar comes from, those are all from different types of bacteria that are added later on in the in the cheese making process to ferment the cheese, and other chemical reactions occur. And so I like to give a cool case of blue cheese. So blue cheese is, you're probably all wondering, oh, where is that blue color from? Or maybe you already know that blue cheese is made from mold. But what they do is that they take a regular piece of cheese and they inoculate it. And so inoculation means that they stab really, really thin needles with mold spores on the tip of the needles, and they stab the cheese multiple times so that the mold spores get into different spots of the cheese. And so when that happens, they leave the cheese out in a warm temperature so that the molds can grow. And that's what creates these cool blue veins in your blue cheese. I know not everyone's a fan of blue cheese, but I do like blue cheese Doritos. That's one of my guilty pleasures. So yeah, if you see the photo on the right of the slide, this is what lab or lactic acid bacteria looks like under the microscope. Not the most appetizing, I know, but we wouldn't have cheese without this. So my next case example is Swiss cheese. So lactic acid made from the lactic acid bacteria is fermented by Propionibacterium. So that's what you get when you see that taste that sweet, nutty flavor in Swiss cheese. It's called propionic acid made from Propionibacterium. Who would have guessed? And as a byproduct, Propionibacterium, when converting lactic acid to propionic acid, you get carbon dioxide, which makes the little holes in Swiss cheese. And so the holes in what we call food scientists or cheesemakers call these holes eyes of the cheese. So now every time I look at Swiss, I just picture little eyes on them. I don't know. I thought it was really cute. Yeah. Moving on, so can we eat the rinds of the cheeses? Put your answers in the chat, or you can annotate if you feel that's more your jam. And so the picture I have on the corner is actually of camembert. And I'll explain how the rinds are made. Depends on the cheese. Yeah. And so when I'm talking about eating the rinds, I'm not talking about the rinds made from paper, like the ones that manufacturers wrap your cheese in. I'm talking about like the natural rinds you would see. So the white casing, not including the wax ones. I know Baby Bell has like, was it Baby Bell? Yeah, the red. Those ones are not made or not naturally made. Okay, so we got one, yes. Let me just look at the chat. Yes, okay, cool. Yeah, we're getting a lot of depends on the cheese. Nice. Okay, I think we're leaning towards C, maybe a couple A's. So I'll share what I have. Can we eat the rinds of cheeses? Yes, the rind of the cheese is generally safe to eat unless it's like it's really obvious when it's like the wax or cheesecloth ones, because if you bite into it, your teeth aren't gonna sink in. You don't need to worry about getting sick if you take a bite out of the rind of cheese. The rind is typically made when the outer layer, so they'll take a regular block of cheese again, and they'll spray the outside with mold spores. And then they grow and form a protective layer around the cheese. And also the mold will start breaking down the proteins in the cheese. And that's why you see brie and camembert being very soft types of cheeses, because the proteins and the sugars are being broken down by the mold spores on the outside. Awesome. I thought that was a cool fact. I didn't know if I wanted to eat brie or camembert rinds anymore after I learned that the entire white casing was all mold, but now that I'm very comfortable with the fact, I really enjoy the different textures of the rind. So awesome. So now we're moving on to making beer. So the main food microorganism responsible is yeast. So yeast will also ferment sugars from barley to alcohol and CO2. So this picture on the right is barley. So the process of making beer with microorganisms is called brewing. And this is where carbon dioxide, so I'm not sure if everyone is legal here or have drinking beer, but that fizziness you get from the beer is from the CO2, which is actually a byproduct of this fermentation. I should probably also define what fermentation is. Fermentation is a chemical process where glucose, so the little sugars, are being broken down without the presence of oxygen. So yeast works anaerobically, so it does not want oxygen when it's breaking down the sugars. And so while carbon dioxide is a favorite product in beer making, someone mentioned wine earlier. So wine is a really similar process where you're fermenting sugars in grapes to get alcohol. The bubbliness in wine is not always wanted, so sometimes they take out this product or leave it so that the CO2 dissipates. Yeah, and I thought that was a cool fact that beer and wine are made in very similar ways. And so if you're wondering how beer stays on the shelves for such a long time, you don't need to put beer in the fridge. I mean, you can if you want to, but they also have a lot of antimicrobial properties that keep them from going bad. So one of them is hops. So hops are antibacterial, obviously against bacteria. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with hops, but they kind of, Bonita mentioned a really cool comparison, but hops really look like the top of asparagus plants. And to me, they kind of look like if pine cones were green and fluffy, that's what a hop would look like. They have a really interesting smell to them. And they're added, they're added as flavoring too. They have a really unique flavor to them and a very herbal type of smell. And so you can see a lot of people describing that their beer is very hoppy. And so this is traditionally added for antimicrobial purposes to keep the beer really long on your shelf. And so IPA beer, it's a type of beer, was formulated to survive really long journeys from England to India all the way back in the 18th century. So these beers have higher alcohol content. So way back then, they saw that, wow, if I added more alcohol, the beer goes bad way less quickly. So alcohol content is also a fighter against bacteria, and high hop content. So this is where different beers actually came from, just to survive different types of journeys. And so that concludes the end of the science, food science portion, and I'll be moving on to information about LFS in general. And so land and food systems, this is a picture from the rooftop garden on the Nest. It's carried by like a group of students in LFS called Roots on the Roof. I often come here to study. It's really peaceful. You get fresh air when you study, and you can also see the cool plants that they're growing. I know I've seen wild strawberry, kale, lettuce being grown, and I think it's a great place and community to meet people. Everyone's super friendly, so you can always say hi. And so yeah, why would you choose to study in LFS? Sorry, I'm gonna switch. I know the screen's a little off. There we go. And so one, we address local and global issues. We offer a variety of programs that deals with food security, human nutrition, health, land use, animal welfare, climate change, how we feed the global population, preventative health, medicine, and dealing with food waste. If you're interested in education, nutrition education, this might be the, I know I just laundry listed so many different things you can learn, but I've learned all of these things in LFS, which I think it's great. We cover such a wide variety of topics from a systems perspective. And so two, we're a really tight-knit community of staff, faculty, and students. You get to know your peers and professors at a really personal level. And so what I found is that this has led me to so many opportunities within LFS to get involved, such as my current work-learn position as an LFS ambassador, as well as volunteer and research positions. So if you're interested in learning more about research or volunteer, mostly volunteer, I'm your girl. You can ask me more about that at the end. But yeah, I was actually studying in the Faculty of Science my first 2 years in UBC. And one thing was I was so nervous about making friends because I think I just had that idea that most people met their friends in first year and that was it, solidified, done. And since I was transferring in my third year, I was just nervous in general, but I came into my first class and immediately decided to tap someone on the shoulder, and everyone's so welcoming and warm, and you get to see the same faces since it's a smaller faculty over and over, which I really like because it makes them more easily approachable. And same with professors as well. The first professor I approached was in my my FNH 200 class, which is Intro to Food Science. It was Dr. Madadi Noe, so I call her Azita, and she was the professor I also TA'd for, so teacher's assistant. Yeah, and she was super friendly, and you get to see your professors who taught you in first year all the way until your fourth year, and maybe you're too shy to approach them in first year, but if you see them again, you're more likely to say hi. And yeah, that's why I really like the tight-knit community. Sorry, that was a little bit of a ramble, but yeah, a bit of my experience. And so three, you get really hands-on experiences that prepare you for life after graduation. So when I think about this, I'm thinking of the cool practicums. I'm really excited to take the cooking class in my next, hopefully I get to take it in person, but there's a cooking class in dietetics where you go into small groups and you go into the Vija's kitchen that we have at FNH, and you learn about foods from a variety of different countries, as well as the sensory properties. Oh my gosh, I'm mixing up my words. It's 8 a.m. I'm sorry. The sensory properties of food, why people choose to eat certain foods, why people choose not to eat certain foods. Yeah, it's a really hands-on experience. Like I said, we have a lot of practicums. So this is a photo from the UBC farm. There's a lot of practicums here where you get to do research on the different plots. If this is what you're interested in, so learning about carbon dioxide and soil, because soil is, I'm not sure if anyone has gone to the soil workshop. I'm so sad I missed it, but I heard it was really great, and you get to learn that soil is not just dirt. It has lots of cool, it's living and breathing, and you get to study it. And I thought that was very cool. Yeah, I'd also like to mention one of my favorite classes, which is LFS 350. It's part of the LFS core series, and this is where you get to go out into your community to work with community partners. So my project that I did with them was I created a food asset map for the Richmond community. And this was really important because we did an assessment of the population. We learned that English was not people's first language. And we also realized that around 60% of the population had fruits and vegetable intakes under 5 servings a day, which is an issue since the recommended was around 7 to 9. And we created the food asset maps to help them locate affordable and nutritious and fresh food assets that are close to them, as well as food literacy classes, if they choose to take those, that are free and within their community. Yeah, I thought this was a really great project because we were able to analyze the effects of this. And it was also provided in different languages to be more reader friendly. And so now I'll be going over the degree programs and majors. So in year 1, you have 2 options. You have the Bachelor's of Science in Food, Nutrition, and Health, and that's the one I'm in. And you also have the Bachelor's of Science in Applied Biology. I'll be going over the majors really briefly. Really briefly, I guess. So from Food, Nutrition, and Health, if you're interested in studying nutrition and how vitamins work in your body, so like the food that you intake and how it relates to your health, this would be nutritional sciences. And just to preface, all the white bubbles are non-competitive, and all the green bubbles are competitive majors. And so if you choose to do food science, it is a competitive major, so they do look at your grades when you're applying from first to second year. And you also have the double major, which is combining food, nutrition, and health and food science. And the food, nutrition, and health major is a very flexible one. You really get to pick what you want to focus in, and it gives you a lot of opportunities to take electives outside of F&H. And so this is what I call, you really get to customize your degree. And the program I'm in is actually Dietetics, so it's a 3rd-year entry program. You can apply in your 2nd year. So as a dietetic student, we do 5 years in total, but you can also apply in your later years like I did. I applied in my 3rd year, I believe, yes. And then you become a registered dietitian at the end. So you can work in public health, nutrition education, the government. You can also work for clinical or private practices. So most new dietitians end up working in the hospital, so doing patient care. I got a bit of experience with this. I'm thinking about maybe going into clinical, so doing renal or like focusing on health or diabetes prevention are all part of the clinical aspect. And for the applied biology, you can major in applied animal biology. So if you're interested in animal welfare, and this is also a really popular pre-vet option, but it's not the only path that people go into. And we also have the sustainable agriculture and environment. So if you're interested in soil, plant and agroecology sciences, and enhancing the sustainable food production, this one is for you. We also have 2 other degree programs, and so that is global resource systems. I found this one super cool because you get to travel. So you pick your specific resource. I'll give an example. It's really random, but sharks could be your resource, and you choose a location. So Australia, you can study sharks, and you would actually physically go to Australia when it's not COVID and study sharks there. And that's part of the GRS degree program. We also have the food resource and economics. So if you're really interested in the economics aspect, like food marketing, analyzing consumer needs and how our limited resource can meet those, FRE might be for you. Yeah, I'd also like to highlight a faculty member, Dr. Patricia Hingston. She's a food science prof in LFS. And so she teaches the class FNH 313, which I had the pleasure of taking. I really like her quote too. What I especially love about food science is that it applies the three main branches of science, biology, chemistry, and physics, to solve issues surrounding food production and safety. So a lot of the information I presented in this slide is what I learned from Patricia Hingston's class, and also FNH 200, which is Dr. Madadi Noe's class. Yeah, I definitely recommend them. Patricia Hingston's class is also a little more hands-on. She does a couple of labs for this. It's super fun. You get to go in with, we didn't get to do this because of COVID, but normally you would take a really long swab and then she sends you out to different places in Macmillan. I know the washroom is a popular one that people like to swab, and we found that the toilet seats were not the dirtiest area in the washroom. It was actually, you know, the thing that dispenses paper or like hand towels, that had the most highest bacterial count. So just be careful of those when you're out and about. Yeah, anyways, I thought that was really cool. We get to learn about food diseases, how we can prevent them, and also food safety and regulations that we see. So if you're ever curious about how things are labeled, food laws and regulations for them, yeah, you get to learn all this in food science. It's a really applicable degree as well. You're learning a lot of technical skills in food science. Half of your classes are your science-based courses, so your chemistries, and you also do a lot of food science labs where you're in the laboratory and you're breaking down foods apart and like test tubes. It's all really cool stuff. And so admission quick notes. So if you're thinking, wow, I really want to study food science, these are the high school courses that you need to take. So for grade 11, you would need your English, pre-calculus, both chemistry and physics. Whereas in grade 12, you only need one of the sciences, biology, chemistry, or physics. Personally, I recommend taking all three, or not, maybe as many as you can, because you do need to come in with a strong foundation in science. If that's possible for your course schedule. I know it really helped me when I was doing my first year courses. And of course you need your math, so pre-calculus 12 and English 12. So for any post-secondary transfer students, sorry, you need your most recent 24 to 30 credits and also meet the high school requirements and aim for around mid-70s or higher to be competitive. Yeah, so the application deadline for LFS is January 15th, 2021. But I'd really like to hammer in the December 1st, 2020 deadline for early admissions, because not only is it early admissions, this is where if you just submit your application early, you're automatically considered for any entrance scholarships. So there's not a supplemental or like an additional application for the admissions scholarships. It's just handing it in early. So please do so. Organize your time wisely and try to hand it in by December 1st. Yeah, scholarships are a great opportunity. And yeah, detailed instructions on how to apply can be found on u.ubc.ca. So stay in touch with us. If you have any advising questions that you think of later, you can email an advisor at students@landfood.ubc.ca. This is the handle for our Instagram as well as our Twitter. And if you want to find out more information, do your research on your programs, you can go to landfood.ubc.ca, which is our website. Thank you so much for the presentation. and for coming. And it's so early, and yeah, that was really fun.